Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today I'm talking about album number 5 from Rumpistol, Away. Alright, we finally made it to the most recent Rumpistol album. He does apparently have a 6th album called After the Flood coming out later this year. I'll probably review that when it comes out, but for now this is gonna be the last video in the series before I move on to the next one. So yeah, for those of you who missed the previous video, Rumpistol had just come off the heels of a collab album with singer Red Baron called Floating, which had come out 2 years prior, a bit of an experiment for Rumpistol into how to best incorporate vocals in his music. That turned out with pretty mixed results, to say the least. That album was pretty all over the place, but with this project, he aimed out to iron that project's flaws and create an all-around more cohesive and much less derivative follow-up that was larger in scale than any of his previous outings. And in those particular departments, he undoubtedly delivered. Away is definitely the kind of album that is easily recognizable as Rumpistol's style from a distance, his particular low-key blend of IDM and glitch with the usual layers of bell sounds and acoustic instrumentation, generally sticking to the same kinds of sounds that he already explored on Mere Rum and Dynamo, but also this time involving some light pop elements and a few tracks with vocal features, many also with Red Baron again, and most of the grooves even kind of carry like a John Hopkins-like bounce to them. And apparently it really turned out to be a success for him. This seems to be the one project from him that people are most likely to know. A few even having let me know that they were excited to hear me talk about it. It certainly has the best album cover of his projects and the most eye-catching track listing, with every title starting with A and either a phrase or a single word whose emphasis is not on that first syllable. Asleep, awake, a mar, a fall, adrift, a dream, a town, Atacama. You get the idea. Seems to have really stuck with people. As for me, though, I think it's pretty good. I wish I could say I loved it, though. The trouble is, Away is another one of Rumpistol's samiest projects to date. This project had the exact same weaknesses for me as his Mere Rum album. All these tracks kind of go for similar blends and very much run together, and it really falls in the background easily without leaving as strong an emotional impact as I'd like. That said, not only does this album have the added benefit of improving significantly if I can get myself to pay close attention to it, there are definitely more standout tracks here than on Mere Rum. That album really only had 2 tracks that particularly stuck out to me, and this one had at least like 5-6 tracks that resonated as solid highlights, and even a few of the ones that didn't could still form an identity. The vocal tracks here are especially important to have around as something that does keep my interest, even if not all of them are particular highlights. And again, this album is also noticeably better than the whole Floating album. My main problems with that project were that it felt like a loose collection of tracks that didn't come together, and Red Baron's vocal performances made him sound exactly like Tom York. But obviously neither of these issues apply here. Red Baron does not sound like Tom York anymore. Hell, his different performances throughout this album sound like they came from several entirely separate people. Like, for instance, on the title track, his voice is extremely deep and low-pitched, while on A Fall he sounds almost female. It's quite a contrast, and the improvement from that last project is definitely felt. But may as well just go down track by track. A Dream is the album's intro, a mysterious number with muted synth plucks, scratchy but airy pads blowing over the mix, and some descending vibraphone and maybe steel drum melodies later for that sense of subtle intrigue. Good start. And A Town is a solid way to kick the album into gear with its dreamy and soulful piano progressions, minimal and sparse but bouncy foot-tapping beats and stutter-edited vocal licks going over more bells and whooshing pads and occasional quick buzzing and glitching breakdowns, piercing through the mix at various intervals. Good atmosphere developed here, and even some solid emotional resonance, not unlike something you'd find on Dynamo. Probably even more complex than the stuff on that album, though the constant changing up of the track also means it never really has a hook, and it's not likely to stick in my head. Whether or not that's truly a hindrance is up for you to decide, obviously. Anyway, the title track is next, got our first vocal track with Red Baron's surprisingly deep voice performance as a sorta duet with Catherine Mills-Reimer from the band OOFJ. OFJ? Well, maybe calling it a duet is pushing it. They don't really work off each other, and I'm guessing their performances were recorded in totally separate places and times, but at least the tune is pretty easily memorable. Also, the smooth instrumental underneath lots of pianos and reversed guitars is quite nice as well. This track is a consistent highlight either way. Pretty strong opening stretch so far, though after this the album gets a little less consistent. Amnesia feels like a sparser and darker companion to the title track, even as Red Baron saying "running away" to match the last track's lyrics. I'm starting to get the feeling this is part of how I'd often stop noticing where tracks begin and end from here on. But yeah, quite a lot of strange sounds running through this, some drum and bass beats and vocal glitches and sparse synths that come in waves and seem to have a different texture every time they come back. Sometimes I wouldn't even notice Red Baron was even here. He's never much of an upfront presence. Either he's placed in the background or covered in effects or both at any given moment. I mean, the track's interesting, but it being called Amnesia seems only fitting because obvious punchline goes here. Okay, I won't rag too much on these tracks' forgettability from here. It's clearly not trying to be a pop album in any way. It's trying to be more heady and cerebral. Anyway, we then get Asleep, which has much more energy and pulse. Minimal house beats pattering along, while many layers of bells and kalimbas and undulating bass pass by, occasionally some heavily glitched and processed vocal snippets from what sounds like a little kid trying to sing. Or at least that's what it eventually sounds like. Some of that John Hopkins influence really starting to come in too, but obviously not so present that it doesn't sound like Rumpistol anymore. One of the brightest and most uplifting spots in the track listing. And in contrast with following track Awake, which ironically has a much more lethargic and sluggish feel to it, despite moving at the same tempo. Bass rumbling and harpsichord-like leads piercing through and kind of wandering about through plenty of other strange synth textures without much of a defined direction. Interesting to think of how Asleep is bright and energetic and Awake is comparatively hungover and confused sounding, as if to say that Rumpistol feels like he has more life in him in his dreams. I feel that. Anyway, A Glance is next, and it's another more low-key moment. Its pulse mainly being driven by a subtle low-pitched synth line, while the percussion often falls out of step a tiny bit. There's also some vocal segments and guitars that are covered in an absolute ton of reverb. Even a minimal wavering synth solo to close it all out. It's there, I guess. It usually doesn't grab my interest. And neither does Amar, another much lower key moment. Not much more than very slow and minimal percussion going up against various layers of guitars and maybe a tiny bit of a pitched up vocal chop echoing out every now and then. And I guess there's some percussive textures that sound like scissors cutting and other pads that sound like very depressed male choirs later on. Like I said, this album gets better the closer you pay attention to it. Most listens of this thing I didn't even notice this track was there, and obviously there's still plenty of substance and texture to latch onto if you are actively looking for it. But okay, thankfully we get another vocal track after this to help ground us a bit more. A Fall, about when the world falls in love. It's not a major favorite admittedly, but Red Baron sounding like a woman is interesting. And the textured deep house-ish beats switching up underneath him do help give the track more momentum. I believe this is the closer on the physical edition. Yeah, this wouldn't have been that bad a closer. Also getting some C418 vibes out of this one and the way its bass synths build up over much of it. And then Adrift is another highlight, featuring the highest pitched vocal snippets on the album, delicately placed over layers of sparse beats ebbing and flowing, next to very quiet blends of pianos and kalimbas and even some kind of 8-bit video game synths playing squirting dub rhythms later. It's very empty and hollow sounding despite having just as much going on as any other track on here and sticks out for me in that way. At least in the first half. Some of those windy pads fill up this space later, but whatever. And you got a Halabad, which feels like it directly builds off that track and just kind of meanders around aimlessly. Plenty of strange sounds going around, but doesn't really introduce anything new that other tracks hadn't at this point. Wouldn't mind just cutting that one out. Finally, we close with Atacama, one last vocal track featuring John LaMonica, who'd worked with Rumpistol once before on a one-off single called It's Everywhere. His voice is very reserved and dejected to match the reserved synth and guitar textures that echo away underneath him. And there's a decent hook formed by his lines of go, we go, we go, we go. It's overall a pretty satisfying finish to this project. But yeah, that's Away. Quite a bit to go over there. I think it's worth noting that this album is easily Rumpistol's longest at just under an hour, and I'm not totally convinced that it needed to be padded out as much as it was. It definitely just feels longer than his other albums, and I wouldn't have minded trimming the fat. But it also stands out as unquestionably the densest project Rumpistol's put out to date. Every track has a ton of sounds coming and going, and even when it comes to sheer attention to detail, this probably stands as the top for him. But just like basically everything else he's put out, his style of production remains very introverted and not aiming to grab your attention by itself. The complexity of this project isn't something that necessarily shows itself on every listen, and like I said before, it typically just blends together in one big mush for me. But I don't know, I guess I got about equal enjoyment out of this than I did out of his debut. His debut had most of its quality dumped into 3 stellar standouts which have only been growing on me since I reviewed it. The Adrift track, Two Lone Swampsons, and Tango Boy. And the rest of it was perfectly fine, but nothing that would really sweep me off my feet. Away, meanwhile, doesn't have any one standout as good as the best tracks from his debut, but all that quality is much more evenly distributed across the whole project. There's no track here that I found truly amazing, but nothing I found to be an outright clunker either. Even the more filler-y moments always had quite a bit of substance to latch onto. And I guess before I finish this review and close out the series, I should give a shout out to an EP or mini-album he put out in 2017 called Drops. I think that project accomplishes a very similar blend of sounds, but did it in a little more striking way despite no vocal tracks on that one. Still pretty stripped back, yet highly complex, but also with a more uplifting and refreshing contrast in sound to the generally more muted and moody feel of Away. Also, only 6 tracks means it's tighter and much less padded out. Might have even left a little more of an impact than this project did. Not a lot more, but a little more. It's worth checking out too. But I digress. I guess take that all as you will. This was a pretty interesting series overall. It's been cool to see this guy progress as an artist and keep expanding his style and artistry to various extents. Away is his most sonically diverse project in terms of the amount of different sounds and synth textures and instrumentation going into it. It does almost kind of seem like the logical endpoint to where he started, even if personal enjoyment-wise he's just kind of come full circle into my, yet again, only liking him and not loving him. So yeah, I imagine this is the kind of project that will do more for the more IDM-loving crowd, just thanks to its instrumental density and complexity, and whatever I may personally feel on it, I certainly think it's worth giving a shot. And that's everything I have to say on the topic of Rumpistol for now. I'm overall feeling a 7.3 out of 10. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters. They're awesome people. You want to add yourself to that list or make me reviews with them, link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.